Because, I almost feel bad saying this because, any subject on the Bible should be, a good subject to study, but we've been doing the life of Christ now for quite a while. And we're going to be doing a couple more is it? So tonight, maybe two more. We're going to do resurrection, and then we're going to do probably the ascension and a little bit of a wrap up on the life of Christ, a summary. And the reason why I feel bad is I'm not excited to leave the study or anything like that, but I'm excited that we're going to be moving on to another subject. Again, I believe unless the Lord, puts something else on my mind, I think we're going to be doing apologetics, talking about how to defend the Bible and stuff like that. So how we know the Bible is true and how you present that truth to unbelievers, and we'll do different methods of apologetics. We'll talk about different methods of apologetics, and we'll go through a bunch of stuff. Anyway, we'll talk about that when we get there. You can tell I'm a little bit excited about that subject. But tonight we are going to talk about we're going to review first of all, because it's been a little bit since we've been in this subject. So we're going to talk about the 6 trials of Christ, and we're going to focus on the last trial and the crucifixion, and then we're going to talk about the 7 statements that Christ made from the cross. So turn to John chapter 19. And remember how many trials Christ went through? I just said it actually. 6. And what was the first one?
Oh, no, I can't mind my
Hey, brain.
What brain did?
Where how to spell it.
John 19, you said?
John 19. Yeah, John 19. 6 trials. The first trial was in front of who? Anybody remember? Annas?
And Caiaphas.
No, that was the second one. I forgot to spell Annas, though. I'm just going to put A-N, period.
A-N-N-A-I-S.
Oh, A-I-S.
A-I-S. That's okay. All right.
It's like Isaiah.
Okay.
I-S-A-I-A-H.
Now, who was high priest at this time?
There was 2.
Well, there was one recognized high priest by Rome. Who was that? There couldn't have been 2. There was
the way they switched off
and there
was
was
not
Herod and
yes.
Herod and
No, there's no Herod.
No.
Herod was king. So Annas was. Why did they take him to Annas?
because it was in the region. No. I'm guessing.
Because he
Yeah,
was
no problem.
a political lackey.
He was the
right.
person who was supposed to be high priest.
Oh,
Okay. He was supposed to be high priest.
So was Caiaphas.
Well, Caiaphas was, because they fired Annas, and they went through about 5 high priests.
Caiaphas.
And then they settled on, and that's who Jesus went to first. But people recognized him as the people recognized him as the rightful high priest. Okay.
And I'm incorrect on the spelling. It's no I.
Okay.
A-N-A-S.
All right, thank you.
A-N-N-A-S.
But the Romans would get rid of these guys. As a matter of fact, the guy before Pontius Pilate, by the guy by the name of Gaius, who was the procurator of the region of Judea at the time, went through about 6 of these people because he just would fire them and he'd say, "You're done." But the people always recognized that the high priest was supposed to be held until the death of the high priest. It wasn't something you could just switch in office, switch out of office. So they had this little bit of a problem because the function of the high priest was done by Rome. Rome had the ability to take somebody in and put somebody out, but they didn't recognize that so much. I mean, they used him because, Rome used him. Rome recognized it, but they recognized this guy. Then the second person was, as you said, Caiaphas. And I'm just going to put a CH there, okay? So they took him to Annas first because Annas, they want to know what to do with this guy, and then they take him to Caiaphas. And then the third person, or the third trial that he went through was in front of the Sanhedrin. And these 2 blend. Now these are all, huh?
I said there was a blending of the 2.
Yeah, there's a blending of this one and this one because obviously when they're taking him in front of Caiaphas, the official high priest, you have people waking up and then coming to court, basically. So these 2 kind of blend together. These 2 kind of, it's kind of difficult to tell exactly where the line is, where Caiaphas is in charge and then he's in front of the whole Sanhedrin at one point. So these are the same event, but they're different enough that we're going to count it as two events. Now these are all church or, well, Jewish or,
Ecclesiastical.
yeah. These are all like religious, I should say, religious kind of things. And then the next three are not religious. The next three are political. And,
State.
yeah, the state. We'll put that there.
That was Pilate number 1.
Okay, Pilate number 1. And then
Herod.
Herod, right?
And Pilate number 2.
And then
Pilate
Pilate
the
number
second
2.
time.
All right. And now this would have been odd to them because Jesus really didn't commit any crimes. Okay, this would have been against Rome. This would have been just as odd as, we look at somebody who's not a Christian, like committing some type of Trinitarian sin, like saying that, like a oneness Pentecostal. Like if we took the oneness Pentecostal and we're like, well, we can't throw him in jail, so let's take him to the county commissioner, or let's take him to the sheriff's office and stuff. And the sheriff would be like, why are you bringing this guy to me? What has he done? I don't know what to do with him. And Pilate didn't know what to do with him at first, but when he found out he was from the region of Galilee, he sent him to Herod. And then Herod wanted to see some great miracle from him. He said, I was really happy to see him, and he wanted to see some great miracle from him. But then he realized, well, look, this is not my deal. So he sends him back to Pilate. And then what Pilate wants to do is he realizes that these people are out of hand. He realizes that Jesus hasn't done anything really wrong. And so he wants to do is just kind of maybe beat him a little bit, have a public, so maybe that will satisfy them, because he doesn't really want to kill this person. That's kind of where we pick it up in the story. So if you look at John chapter 19 and verse 1, it says, Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in purple robe, and they came up to him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews, and struck him with their hands. But Pilate went out again and said to them, See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him. Now, you got to understand that the Romans, especially the Roman soldiers, were a bored bunch of people. Okay, these were people who wanted to fight. And I know, like you've said, you've been on bases before and stuff. It's like, I know that for a lot of people, it's boring work, just kind of like you just sit around and you're not doing a whole lot. Well, these people didn't have a Judeo type of Christian background. They weren't raised with manners and things like that. And so when you get somebody and we even experienced this, boy.
They were heathens.
Yeah, you throwing tomatoes and rotten fruit at people who are going to the execution, even 500 years ago. It wasn't a good thing, and people were not kind to people who were being executed. So they struck him. They beat him. They would put something over his head and then hit him and ask him to prophesy. Which one of us hit you? Prophesy. But Pilate went out and said, look, he flogged him, which in the flogging here is the 40 lashes of the flogging minus 2. And I think we're all familiar with the instruments in which they used. And, they had that whip that had the bones on the end of it, and they would strike him, and it would cut through, even sometimes organs.
Called the cat o' nine tails.
Yeah. Even organs would sometimes show up through this. So this was a pretty severe beating, and I think what he's hoping here, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, is that he'll acquiesce the people. He'll just, not necessarily to die, but he'll just, the people will finally, okay, he's had a beating, let's let him go. He really hasn't done anything deserving of death. But these people are insistent, and Pilate's in a little bit of a tricky situation. Now, morally, he's not in a tricky situation because this is an innocent person, and he shouldn't put him to death. That sun getting in your eyes, I think maybe we can twist it a little more, or twist it the other way.
See if I can go in.
Yeah, that might be better. Is that better with all the light? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I get over here.
There you go.
Is that better or no?
It's going between the sides.
It's coming to the side.
No, leave it.
No, just
Go
leave
back.
it.
Go
Duct
back. Go
tape.
back.
No.
That's less.
You're blinding me.
All right.
No, duct tape works.
All right. So Pilate was in a bit of a quandary here because he ends up crucifying Jesus, of course, when they ask him to crucify him. And the reason why Pilate is in a bit of a quandary is not ethically. Ethically, he knows that he shouldn't kill this person. Now, they had the ability to kill people. They did have that right. But that doesn't mean that they had the ability to do that without any type of retribution. But Pilate is on a short leash here. He's been in Jerusalem ruling for about 5 years at this point. And he's already got 3 strikes against him where he wasn't able to manage the people of Judea at this point. And Rome is hearing about this. Rome knows about these 3. It's not 3 strikes you're out because they're not playing baseball here. But the first time he hears about these rabble-rousers, the Jews, who won't bow to idols. And so what he does is he marches into town with idols, basically, is what he does. They had the Roman legion thing with the bust of Caesar on the top of their poles, and they looked at that as an idol. And the Jewish people basically said, hey, you can kill us. We don't care. You can kill us. And he wasn't prepared for that. He wasn't prepared for the actual amount of resistance they were going to give him over having idols in their city. And then he did that on another occasion too, in somewhere close to Jerusalem, where he just had, so soldiers had two kinds of uniforms. They had their fancy uniform for parades and things like that.
Dress blues and OCPs.
Yeah, and then they had their fighting uniforms.
BDU, battle dress uniform.
Yeah, and their dress uniforms had images on them. You know, they would have different images of Caesar and things like that. And he got in trouble for that actually twice. And then another time he got in trouble with the Jews because, so you know about the animal sacrifices that go on in the temple all the time. Okay, so there's lots of blood. It goes down through the Kidron Valley, tons of blood. Well, they needed more water for that. They needed more aqueducts. And so he decided to make an aqueduct, and he decided because it was the temple that was needing the aqueduct, he'd take it from the temple. So he rode in there and and basically robbed their coffers, their box where they put their offering box. You know, where it says that the widow put her mite into that thing, that they had those boxes there. And he robbed those boxes and said, well, you guys are paying for it. I mean, I'm not going to pay for it. You guys are the one killing all the animals. And we've got to get more water in here to divert all this blood out of here. So, you know, you're going to pay for it. Well, he got in trouble for that too, because they just put up, not because of the money, but because he dared to ride in, being a Gentile and a non-convert Gentile, he dared to ride into the temple grounds. And remember the outer court, there were different courts. There was the inner court and the inner court and then the outer court, and there were actually little different outer courts. And the outer court where they had the place that you can give, because only a few people could get inside, but they want everybody to give. So it's way on the outside, but that was only for Gentile converts and women. It wasn't just for anybody. Not just anybody could go to that. It was for Gentile converts and women. That was the outest. Now, if you were a Jewish male, you could go there, and then you could go a little further as well. But if you were a Gentile convert or a female, you could only get to that certain point. And so that's where they put the money boxes. Because of course, if you're going to go through there, they want everybody to give, right? So he's on shaky ground, and he doesn't know what to do with these people. So he's trying to get Jesus, trying to not crucify Jesus and then incur another guilt, another problem for himself. But he also doesn't want to upset the people, which would also incur another problem for himself. Okay, so he's kind of on the horns of a dilemma. He wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't want to do the right thing so much that it's going to threaten his position. And it says in verse 4, Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt to him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to him, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to the law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God. Now, that is, let me digress here. There are some people who will say, like, for example, Mormons say this a lot. They say, oh, I'm a son of God, just like you're a son of God, I'm a son of God. He's not being crucified because he is claiming to be a son of God, just like everybody else is a son of God. Okay, the Son of God was used in unique ways. Nor was he crucified simply because he was claiming to be the Messiah. The Messiah isn't, claiming to be the Messiah isn't a capital offense. When it says Son of God here, that he has made himself the Son of God, he means that he's claiming that he carries the nature of God. He's being crucified for blasphemy. When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Now, this is very interesting here. He was more afraid. He said he was the Son of God. He recognizes that these people are just crucifying him because they don't like him. He upturned their tables. He's done all this stuff. He's going against Jewish customs. He recognizes all this stuff. But this is very interesting because he is more afraid. Now the Romans were not monotheists; they were polytheists. So he didn't know who this guy is. He's like, "This is the Son of God. Am I crucifying, somebody from Mount Olympus, basically, an offspring of Zeus, kind of a thing?" These are the kind of thoughts that would be going through his head, especially with the cross reference with what his wife told him. Does anybody remember what his wife told him?
She had a dream.
Yeah, Matthew 27:19. Turn there real
and
quick.
And did it say don't touch him?
Yeah. So in Matthew 27,
See, those are the little things that pop up into my mind when I'm not concentrating on it. That's all I have to do is just concentrating.
just not
Stop thinking
concentrate.
and it just comes. You know what? That's scary how often I'll do that. And somebody's like, what was? And I'm like, I don't know. Don't talk to me about it. And it'll just,
It'll just happen.
pop
like
up
10
in
minutes
your
later, it's
mind.
like, bam.
Right in there. And
You're like
spew it out.
randomly spewing facts out and they're like, what?
Yeah.
And verse 19 says, besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, with his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. So you got to understand, when you take the synoptic picture, this is stewing. His wife said, don't have anything to do with this righteous man. They're yelling, crucify him.
And she called him a righteous man.
And he called him righteous man, and they're saying, well, we're crucifying because he says he's the Son of God. He's like, well, I'm freaking out here. I'm freaking out, okay? And in verse 9, he says, he entered his headquarters, and again he said, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, you will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you or the authority to crucify you? And Jesus answered, now this is a weird statement. It's not weird on the front end. It's weird on the second end here. And I don't know much to do with this other than pointing out that that's a little weird, okay? He says, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. Now, it almost sounds like the one who, well, if you have no authority but from above, then it almost sounds like the one who delivered him was God himself. Well, in a sense, that's true. But it can't rightly be applied to God because God can't sin. So it's one of those situations where we ought to use our systematic theology and go to other verses where it says God can't sin, God can't lie, those kind of things, and recognize that he's talking about the Jewish authorities. But he says here, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. All right. In verse 12 it says, from then on Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So Pilate heard these words. He brought Jesus out, and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement in Aramaic, whatever. And it was the day of the preparation of the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them, over to him to be crucified. Now, of course, God promised that, predicted in the Old Testament, so it had to come to pass that he would be crucified. But you do recognize that it's one of those situations, well, they didn't mind stoning Stephen, right? So why would they be hung up on this law that they couldn't So just so you know, everybody knows at this point, they had, in Jerusalem, they had the right to kill rescinded. Okay, they weren't allowed to kill people. Only Rome was allowed to kill people. Now that wasn't true of every city that Rome was in charge of. As a matter of fact, each city had their own contract with Rome, and it varied depending upon the city. Okay, but this city in particular had the right, the authority to kill rescinded, because they kill a lot of people
And so
for
they probably
a lot of
abused it.
reasons that
Yeah.
Rome doesn't think they should kill people. Killing people for blasphemy. Well,
Pretty bad if Rome thinks you're overdoing it.
yeah, that's certainly true.
Well, they were going by the Old Testament, the law.
Right, they were going by the law.
Yeah.
They were going by
So you had an unruly child.
Very unruly. That's a little misconceived. If
No,
you look
very unruly.
yeah, it's somebody who has to be a drunkard and beat his mother up. Is actually the what the verse says. That's one of those things that people kind of often they misread. They think that just to have an unruly child, you just take them. It's a super bad situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, of course, we would put that person in jail, but they would just execute. They
Take them outside
could.
the city and stone.
But they have execution reasons for all sorts of reasons, and they were pretty arbitrary when they want to keep them, when they don't want to keep them too. So why? Let me ask you this question: what is going on that they want Jesus crucified by Rome, but later they don't mind stoning Stephen? Let me just answer this. So I'm going to put that out there as a question. I'm going to kind of answer it in a little bit of a roundabout way. Okay, one popular myth in Christianity, which can't really be proven, it can't be disproven, but I disagree with it, is that, and I know you've heard it, and I may have even preached it in the past. It's because it's one of those things that's said so often, so many times, but when you actually look at the details, you're like, might not necessarily be true. And I talk about the fickleness of the people, how fickle the people are. And they'll say, see, 1 week earlier, he was riding into Jerusalem, and then they were all saying, Hosanna in the highest, and laying down palm branches. And then a week later, he had disappointed everybody, and now they're all these same people are all yelling, crucify, crucify. That's not what's happening, okay? They took Jesus by night because Jesus had won the approval of the people. This was a set up audience. Yes, there were people there, but it wasn't this. They got him there as early as possible in the morning. As a matter of fact, they tie him to the crucifixion beam and have him drag the crucifixion beam by 9 o'clock. So this is early in the morning. They want this done as quickly as possible, under the radar as much as possible.
A lynch mob.
Yes. And so I don't really necessarily believe that the people who are yelling Hosanna are the same people who yell crucify him a week later. During this week, the people loved Jesus. He was showing these people, everybody knew that they were getting ripped off by having to pay the high priest and pay for all these animals. Everybody knew that.
You're overcharging.
Very much so. So they took him at night, they took him on the sly, they took him as early as they could get him to Pilate. And when, you see, So there are some times when like I want to go home early from work, but we
Every
need the
day.
money, but I don't want to stay at work. So, I could say in kind of a loose way, well, there was nothing to do and the boss didn't want me on the clock and and so he sent me home. It's true enough. It's true, but I really wanted to go home. That's true enough. It is. I get done early, and I could stay and find things to do and make more money, but I could say, well, the boss sent me home. These people, if they did this and had him crucify him and not just do what they did with Stephen, they could say, look, it's not our problem.
No, we didn't do it.
Yeah, we took it in front of Pilate. And Pilate said, "Hey, he's insurrectionist."
They wanted Pilate to be their scapegoat.
Yes, very much so. They wanted Pilate to be their scapegoat, and that's because
The people
would have been on the side of Jesus. So the people would have been on the side of Jesus, but these people can say, "Hey, not our fault. He had charges. We think he's worthy of death. You know that. We took it in front of Pilate." Pilate's the one who decided to crucify him, not us. Pilate was the one who made that final decision.
And it wouldn't even look so much as just Pilate. It would be like Rome decided to get rid of him.
Right. Pilate, with the authority of Rome behind him.
passed the buck,
Exactly.
and then Pilate would be passing the buck.
Yeah.
Well, they decided.
Well, it could go back and forth that way. Yeah. Sure, for sure.
Yeah, he got himself in a pickle on that one.
He did. And we don't know what happened to Pilate, actually.
But he turned it back around on him, though.
Hmm?
He did turn it back around on him, though.
What do you mean?
Pilate.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was like, he ultimately didn't do it. He's like, you make the decision.
Well, they said here, and this was probably a very low point for the Jewish people in verse 15, where it says, "We have no king but Caesar." That's a very low point. And even later he says, in the other Gospels, he says, let his blood be upon our head and on our children's head.
And it was.
And it was. And while I am not dispensational, at least in the traditional form, the idea that from AD 70 all the way up into the rebirth of the nation, I think is significant. The rebirth of Israel in 1949. I think that curse is now being lifted, and I do believe we're going to see much more people flocking into Christianity from the Jewish sources. So basically, eschatologically, I'm thinking the time of the Gentiles might be coming to an end, and the time of the Jews might be coming back in. So that's another whole nother point. But anyway, let's go on here.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Why did Pilate say, "Shall I crucify your king"? Why was he asking that?
It's kind of putting it in their face.
I think he was being sarcastic.
That's what I thought.
He's not saying that they agree that he's their king, but he's just saying, I'm going to crucify your king. I mean, this is the guy you said he's going to be king. All right, and in verse 16, so they delivered him over. What's going on?
We're having she's
I got-
trying to have a private conversation.
I got yelled at by a Jewish mom and grandma today because they didn't like the lunch program, and you're like talking about how things are going to go back to Jewish, and I'm like, no.
Well, I don't necessarily think they're going to go back to Jewish laws or custom. I think they're probably going to go back to the fact that we're going to see an influx of Jewish people receiving the Messiah. Verse 16, so they delivered him over to be crucified. So they took Jesus and went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha, which in Latin is called Calvary. So that's where you get Calvary from, the same place. Skull in Greek, and it's something, I can't remember the Greek word there, but oh well. Aramaic Golgotha, in Latin it's called Calvary. So Calvary means skull in Latin. It's actually like Calvarium or something like that.
That's interesting.
So-
So the
You're
Calvary
cranium,
Church,
where
Calvary
we get the
Church
word
is the
cranium.
skull church?
It is, but that, I mean, they're doing it because of where Christ was crucified. on
Yeah, I
Calvary.
get that, but still,
Yeah,
what's in a name, right?
all right. Yeah, I don't know. It's,
like the
well-
God of the ghouls and the God of the dead in the Satanic Bible is called Mormon, and the followers are called Mormons.
That's a bunny trout.
So that's a deep bunny trail, but still, if Calvary is called skull, anyway, just interesting.
yeah.
Like steer.
It says, there they crucified him, and with two others on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and Greek. So all the common languages, so everybody would know that. Now these chief priests must have had some guts, okay, for lack of a better term. Because not only did they get him to do this, they're going to challenge him here. It says, so the chief priests of the Jews and said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but rather this man said, I am the King of the Jews. But Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Okay.
Politicians to the end.
And they're still amongst us.
Let's talk about the 7 statements from the cross. Now, I'm going to give you the traditional way in which people think that it unfolded, these 7 statements unfolded. Of course, he probably said a lot more than what we have, but we have 7 statements that the Holy Spirit felt necessary to record for us, and they're all significant. There's an order to them. This order is right, but no way to prove 100% definitely. I mean, some things obviously came before and some things obviously came after. He didn't say it is finished at the very beginning. Okay, that's obvious. Obviously, that's going to be near the end. So there's some logical order to it, but there's really no 100% way to tell which exactly came first and which exactly came second. But we're going to give it what people who have put their mind to it think. First one is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that is found in Luke 23, 34. Okay, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, does Jesus ever make a prayer that goes unanswered?
Well, yes, Father, if it is possible, let this
Take
cup
this
pass
cup
from
from
me.
Ooh, good one, good
Yeah.
one. That is a good one. Well, he said is if it's possible.
Nevertheless,
Not
Not
my
my
will,
will,
but
but
your
thy will,
will be
yeah.
done. But he did say it if it's possible. And I don't think it was possible. I don't think it's possible in the sense that this is one of those seminary tricks that people say, like when God destroyed the world with the flood. And I'm going to give you the trick question right up front. Could God have just destroyed the whole world and started over?
It's his world, he can do what he wants.
could he have?
Yeah.
Well,
Could he?
no, because, well,
It's a complicated
Could
yes
he,
and
yes,
no.
would he?
it's a yes
No.
and no, because.
No, he actually couldn't.
It had to
Not
be-
only he
because he
could,
made a covenant with Adam.
right? Well, he made a promise
A promise.
to say.
Not a covenant.
That's
So
true.
he cannot go back on his word.
Right.
So when Jesus said, "If it's possible, take this from me," I don't think that went. I don't think that was a no, because it's if it's possible. I don't think it's I think it was an impossibility because God had promised this to be done. So I think, given the totality of that prayer, I don't think it was a no answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, so let me ask you this. If Jesus said this prayer, Father, forgive them, to these people who are crucified, for they don't know what they're doing, did God answer that prayer in the affirmative?
No.
Why not? Was it an unrighteous prayer?
No.
Is everybody going to heaven?
No,
No,
wait.
forgive
Say
them,
it
they
again.
know not what
Ask
they
the
do. I
Okay,
think
all right,
he's
sorry.
saying
Let me re-ask it. But go.
He's saying, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. It could be for that particular act. It's not all encompassing. They don't know what they've done, every single sin they've ever committed.
Right.
But perhaps that one particular thing.
I think that's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
And maybe there
Just
was
so you know.
some there, but here's the things we never know. Maybe some of them there that got saved.
I would say there's definitely some of them there that got saved.
Remember the Roman soldiers, surely this was.
I would say there is definitely people there who got saved. But so you got this person who crucified Jesus, who Jesus said to forgive him for the crucifixion, who also ends up in hell. Was that person, and I agreed with what you said, that's basically what I'm getting at. Am I making sense?
They were going to hell.
This
before the
person is going to
crucifixion
hell.
ever
The one
happened.
there anyway.
Yeah.
This person's going to hell, but Jesus said don't hold this sin against them. So how can this person go to hell?
But who did he say to?
I think he said they don't know what they're doing. So it would be everybody not knowing what they're doing.
At that moment?
I would say at that moment.
Yeah, but just because that
So,
one is forgiven,
There we go.
you have a whole lifetime of screwing up ahead of you, and you had a whole lifetime of screwing up
There we
behind
go.
you.
This
but
is-
that one sin in the middle.
This
The one
this
that
is
got
the
forgiven.
reason why I bring this up is this is a verse that a lot of times universalists will use to say, see, Christ is going to forgive everybody and everybody's going to make it in heaven. No. This person committed how many sins in their past
Right.
and how many sins in their future.
Well, and that's not
Now
even
he might
applicable
not
to
hold
us.
them. God might very well not punish them for this sin.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're not going to hell. That just means that sin in particular,
And
God's
that prayer
withholding his
wasn't
wrath.
said for all of us that are coming in the future from that event. It was said for the people at that particular point in time.
Right.
It's not
Now
a
we're there
blanket
and
statement.
partaking in the crucifixion.
Yes, it's not.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by who was there.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that's exactly right. That's spot on. Everybody's thinking right, but do you see how people will use this to kind of
Absolutely.
justify a
Because
universalism?
God so loved the world.
Right. Okay. So forgive them. So
That's nice.
the next one is in Luke 23.
No, not me.
Oops, sorry, 23, 43, and that is where the thief on the cross says, "Today will you remember me in paradise." Now, the problem that people bring up with this is that in Luke 23:43, one of the thieves say to Jesus, he tells the other one, "Hey, this guy's done nothing wrong." And he looks at him and he says, "We're being rightly condemned for our sins." And he looks at Jesus and he says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Now, the problem, it's not a problem, it really isn't a problem, and I think you are all sharp enough to jump on this, is that in Matthew chapter 27, verse 44, it says, both thieves reviled him. And in the parallel account in Mark, it says, both thieves reviled him. So did both thieves revile him, or did only one thief revile him?
Were there more than just two?
No, there was probably just the two.
Oh.
Let's assume that there was just two. So think of the synoptic picture now, and try to figure this one out, because it does say they both thieves reviled him, and then later this one says this thief didn't, or this thief did.
No, it didn't say he didn't.
He didn't say he did.
Ah, okay, all right, good. All right.
Later
That's-
on, he changed his mind.
That's just
Bang.
where that's just what Luke decided to say.
Right. What you have here is conversion. And if I'm taking the synoptic picture, probably what happened is in the very beginning, they probably reviled him too. They probably, both of them were saying, "Hey, get us out of here. You can save yourself. Save us. You say you're the king of the Jews." They were probably both saying that. But what happened to one? Conversion happened to one. conversion. He was going just along like the other one was, and then God converted him on that cross. And we can learn a couple of things from that. Is no one is beyond the hope, particularly if they've heard the message. I often think about this, and I don't know 100% for sure. Now, I do know that everybody who doesn't believe in Jesus goes to hell. God, we know this. But I always think, I'm always praying at that last moment, you know, the message that their grandmother gave, or the message that their father gave to them, is it possible that could come to that person's mind in the moments before they die?
Deathbed repentance, they call it.
Deathbed, or even sometimes what we might not even know. You know, that moment between
Could even speak
that world and this world.
in their own thought. They don't necessarily have to say it out
But
loud.
deathbed repentance is. Now let me say this. 2 thieves were crucified on the cross. One repented and went to heaven, one did not. And by that lesson we can learn that no one is without hope, but also no one should expect either. You can't assume. You can't assume. We can hope, but we can't assume. And we can rely on the Word of God that we know that only believers can go to heaven. But we don't know what that can happen in the final moments of death. We don't know. But we can't assume either. Because one of them did go to hell, and one of them did go to heaven.
Right.
So it's hope without assumption. But in the synoptic picture, I really think that we need to, conversion's happening. He's going through the motions just like the other person. And conversion can happen right at that moment, right before you die, that moment. All right, the next one is in John chapter 19. And verse 26 through 27. And this is the mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother. That's significant because Jesus is dying as somebody who keeps the law. And part of the eldest in the family is that he has to take care of his widow mother. Now, Catholics have used this to say, see, if Mary had other children, then why didn't he just commission this to James? Right? James would have been the next oldest, we assume. James or Jude, I can't remember who the next, I think it was James was the next oldest. So they would say that, see, the law says that if the oldest son dies and the next son takes over, that's kind of the custom. And so then obviously Mary didn't, those other children were not Mary's, they were Joseph's by a previous marriage. That's what they say. How would we wrangle ourselves out of that quandary? Well, first of all, let's wrangle it out of it this way. Every text of the Bible that we have says that she was a virgin until Jesus was born. It says until, which assumes that afterwards there was the regular course of marriage that happened afterwards, okay? The second thing, because Catholics, they'll come up with these things. They'll say, see, and I don't mean just to pick on Catholics. It's, other people in general have different beliefs. But they'll say this about this. They'll say, see, Jesus is handing him off to a non-family member. However, is John truly a non-family member under the new covenant? And what if the truth is that Jesus is saying that under the new covenant, families are, it's more important to be taken care of by a believer than an unbeliever. I think that's what's going on here. See, he's passing his mother off to his true brother.
Who is my mother and my brothers.
Right.
But he who does the will of God.
Right, exactly. That was a good one. I didn't even think of that one, but that's a good one. But that's exactly the right case. What did he say? Who is my mother and who are my brothers? But he who does the will of God. So don't be fooled by that. But you'll hear that when people argue for the perpetual virginity of Mary. They'll say, well, see, if these were her other kids, then Jesus would have said, James, you take care of them. Not, I mean James, the brother of Jesus, not James, the brother of John. Okay, I know there's a lot of same names in the Bible. All right. And then Matthew 27:46. This is, my God, why have you forsaken me? This would have been the point in which Jesus experienced the wrath of God. Okay? Hell is the punishment of God. And it's also, in a degree, a separation from God. You don't want to have one without the other. Now, by separation from God, I don't mean separation in the sense that we deny his omnipresence. Okay? People sometimes think, they say the hell is a Christless eternity or a godless eternity. And that's true in a way. But then other people come along and say, well, isn't God omnipresent? If he's omnipresent, how could he? It says he doesn't even listen. He can't even hear the prayers of the wicked. Okay. All right. God is actively in hell.
Yeah, his wrath.
His wrath.
You better believe it.
But none of his good attributes are there.
His grace is there.
None of his grace is there. And none of his redeeming qualities are there. And when Christ here, this goes all the way up to the point of heresy, right to that line, and we're looking over it. Because how could Jesus be separated from God? You know what I mean? It's one of those things, it's like, it's beyond me. At some point we just go, it's beyond us. God the Father turned his back on God the Son. Remember the blessings of the priest? He says, may the Lord bless you,
Keep you.
and may the Lord keep you, and may the Lord make his face to shine upon you. Those are three ways of talking about God's favor. Being kept by God, being blessed by God, and then that's summed up in may his face be shined upon you. That's another way to talk about God's blessing. When God turned his back, he was turning his back on him. He was taking away every blessing that could possibly be given. And instead, in that vacuum, every curse that could possibly, all the wrath that God has for sin was poured out on him. Now this is why Jesus had to be both God and man. Because some people will say, well, how can Jesus suffer 3 hours on a cross and you have to go to hell forever? Well, because Jesus in his eternal nature can take on the full wrath of God in 3 hours. This is why a Jehovah's Witness Jesus won't do. A Jehovah's Witness Jesus, if he was punished for your sin, just another man was punished for your sin, he'd be in hell today. God could do that. God could create another perfect person, have them never sin, and truly represent you as a person, and then punish that person throughout all eternity, and not punish you instead. But the problem is that person would still be in hell today. Because as a person, he couldn't take on the full wrath of God. He'd have to take it on throughout eternity. But because Christ has an eternal nature within himself, he has the ability to take on the eternal wrath of God. This is why Jesus can suffer in 3 hours, or whatever time that the Father deemed that cup is filled, or that cup is emptied and filled up in him. He could deem that whatever time that needed to be given, 3 hours, an hour, whatever he thought it was the case, whatever he thought was a just punishment. The other reason it had to be God is think about this. If God just created another person and took on your sins, you would owe your highest debt of gratitude to somebody who was ultimately just a man. You would owe your highest gratitude, your most redeemed effect to somebody who was only a man.
And not God.
And not God. Oh, he was only a man. This is why Jesus had to be both man and God, so that he could take on the full wrath of God and not experience that wrath forever and ever. Okay.
And he wouldn't have an inheritance.
Yeah.
And he couldn't be worshipped, or shouldn't be worshipped. Because he would be in hell.
Right.
Gonna become an idol.
Yeah, well, you can't worship something that's not God. You're not supposed to worship anything that's not God. So there's a great book that I read a long time ago that had a really profound effect on me, and I was pretty young when I read it. I was like 24, and it was a book by Anselm, and it's called Credeus Homo, and he was kind of the big name between, we hear about Augustine in like the 4th century, and then we hear about Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. Well, there's a lot of people in between, and probably one of the biggest people in between there was a guy named Anselm. And Anselm wrote some good apologetics work as well. But he's the person who came up with the ontological argument for the existence of God. I don't know if you ever heard it, if you YouTube it. It's a very complicated argument. But he wrote this amazing book called it's called Credeus Homo, which means in Latin, why the God-man. And he goes through and he talks about why Jesus had to be both God and man, and that you cannot have one without the other. And there are things like this that come up in the book. All right, real quickly here, the last couple, John 19:28. So after he's done with this, he says, I thirst. I thirst. And they bring him some water, some hyssop and some water, and they give it to him. And I believe that was a time where he didn't take it. And I think, does everybody know why he rejected that?
Because then they use like an herb or something to kill the pain.
Yeah, it basically killed the pain. And then the last one, so he said he thirsts, so it's over now. He completed that act. He completed the act of taking on the full wrath of God. And then at that point, he's like, I thirst, and they're going to bring him some water, which he rejects. And the last one is John 19:30.
No, there were 7. This is
Number
only
6.
gonna be 6.
Which one did I miss?
Oh, no, we have,
6. There is 7, and I missed one.
did
Okay.
you write down it is finished?
That's this one. It is finished. It is finished. That's the last one. Tetelestai. It's complete. By it is finished, I don't know I'm sorry. Well, sometimes you write something down and you forget. It happens. I've done it
I'm leaving
multiple
number
of
6
times.
blank.
But he says it is finished. Oh yeah. And then the last one, no, I think it is finished. And the last one, he says, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he gave it this. So that was the last one. But I don't know where that is because I didn't write it down. So it is finished, and then into your hands I commit my spirit. And he gave up his spirit and died. So what we can learn from it is finished is that there's nothing left.
Complete.
It's complete. There's nothing left to do. We all know that word. What's the Greek word? Does everybody know that Greek word? Tetelestai, right? If you don't know any Greek, you say, I know a little Greek. He runs a shop down there where we get some good euros. It's not what we mean. Everybody needs to know a little bit of Greek, and that's one of the words you need to know. Tetelestai.
It's the same verse.
Is it? Okay, good.
When he had received the drink, Jesus says, it is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
But he didn't say, into your hands I commit my spirit.
Okay.
And that's going to be another verse somewhere. But yes, he did give up his
Not in John.
spirit there, not in John.
Not in John.
You can find it. It is finished means that everything humanly possible that could be done is finished. Okay? And again, it's like I laid the money on the table.
It's in Luke 23:46.
Thank you.
Yep. Good job.
Okay, nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. Everything is done. And then he says it's finished. And did anybody take his life?
Nope.
No.
No, he gave it.
And so he gave it up. Nobody could take his life. From the beginning to the end. He gave it up
Takes it from you, but I
when it
can't
was
down.
done. He gave it up. All right, so next week we will talk about the resurrection and then ascension. James, would you pray for us?
Sure. Gracious Father, thank you so much for your word and for the opportunity to come together to study it. And Lord, thank you for your death on the cross to atone for us and to lay your life down and to take upon the wrath that we could never imagine what it would really be like. And just thank you for that. We just lift it to you in praise in your name.